She stepped off that train with everything she owned in one battered trunk, and hope stitched into every seam of her dress, and the man who had promised to marry her looked right through her, turned his back and walked away without a single word. Megan Foster didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of all those strangers. She pressed her hand against her chest, lifted her chin, and stood alone on that platform in the blazing Arizona sun, like a woman already deciding she would survive this. And she did. But what happened next, nobody saw coming. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Megan's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train pulled into Copper Springs just past noon, and the heat hit Megan Foster like a fist the moment she stepped onto the platform. She gripped the railing with one hand, her trunk in the other, and lowered herself carefully onto the wooden boards, favoring her left leg the way she always did, the quiet automatic habit of a woman who had spent 27 years making sure nobody noticed the limp if she could help it. She had practiced it for so long, it barely cost her anything anymore. Barely. Copper Springs was small, smaller than she'd imagined from the letters. One main road cutting through a cluster of storefronts, a livery stable at the far end, a church with a crooked cross on the steeple, and dust everywhere. Endless red-orange dust that settled on everything and everybody like a second skin. She had come from Dayton, Ohio, where the summers were green and the air smelled like rain. This place smelled like iron and dry earth and something she couldn't name yet. She scanned the platform. There were maybe a dozen people moving about, a woman in a calico dress talking to a merchant, two boys chasing a dog between the water barrels, a handful of men standing near the depot doorway with their hats pulled low. She was looking for Ethan Parker. He had described himself in his letters as a man of medium build, brown hair, clean-shaven except for a mustache. He'd said he would be wearing a red kerchief around his neck so she could find him easy. She spotted the red kerchief first. He was standing apart from the others, arms crossed, watching the train. He was taller than she'd expected, broader. He had the look of a man who worked outside, weathered jaw, sharp eyes, the kind of stillness that came from years of making decisions alone. For one brief, foolish second, Megan felt something loosen in her chest. She had been so afraid on that train. She had told herself over and over that Ethan Parker's letters had been kind, that this was going to be all right, that she was making the right choice. And standing there on that platform, seeing him for the first time, she let herself believe it for just a moment. She started toward him. Her trunk was heavy, and the boards were uneven, and she felt the catch in her left hip, the way she always did when she was tired from traveling, but she kept her pace steady, kept her chin up, kept her eyes on the red kerchief and the man wearing it. He saw her. She watched his face change. It was not dramatic. It wasn't a gasp or a sneer or anything she could have pointed to clearly later. It was quieter than that, and worse. His eyes dropped to her leg, just for a second. Then they came back up to her face, and something in him, some decision, closed shut like a door. Megan stopped walking. "Mr. Parker." Her voice was steady. She was proud of that afterward. He pulled the kerchief from around his neck and folded it once, twice into a tight square and held it in his fist. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided to leave behind. "Miss Foster, I'm glad to finally meet you in person." She extended her hand. "It's a long trip from Dayton. I'd hoped I ain't gonna be able to go through with it." He didn't shake her hand. He looked past her briefly, then back. "I'm sorry for the trouble of the trip. I'll see to it you get a ticket back." Megan's hand dropped. She kept her face very still. "I beg your pardon." "The arrangement." He tucked the kerchief into his breast pocket. "It ain't gonna work. I'm sorry." "Mr. Parker." Her voice was quiet and even. "You corresponded with me for 4 months. You asked me to come. I sold most of what I owned to—" "I understand that. I said I'd see to the ticket." "A ticket." She repeated the word like it was something she was tasting and finding bitter. "You'd like me to simply turn around and go back?" "I think that's best." He glanced down at her leg again just once, and he didn't try very hard to hide it. Megan stood very still for a long moment. The sun was pressing down on the back of her neck. Somewhere behind her, one of the boys chasing the dog let out a whoop of laughter. The sounds of the platform went on exactly as they had before, entirely indifferent to what was happening in this small, awful corner of it. "Keep your ticket," she said. "I won't be needing it." He looked at her then for the first time with something like surprise. "Miss Foster." "Good day, Mr. Parker." She picked up her trunk. She turned. And she walked steady, careful, deliberate away from Ethan Parker and his red kerchief, and the life she had spent 4 months letting herself want. She did not cry until she was around the corner of the depot building, out of sight, with her back pressed against the hot planks and her trunk set down between her feet. And even then, she only allowed herself a minute. 1 minute. Then she straightened up, pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, and thought about what she was going to do next. She had $11.40. She had 2 dresses, a good wool coat she wouldn't need until winter, a Bible, and a small tin of her mother's recipes. She did not have a home, a job, or a single person in Copper Springs who knew her name. She was 27 years old, alone, and 1,000 miles from anything familiar. She picked up her trunk and walked back out onto the main road. The first person she spoke to was a woman selling bread rolls from a cart near the general store. A heavy-set woman with white hair and sharp blue eyes who looked at Megan the way older women sometimes did, taking in everything in about 4 seconds. "You just come in on the noon train?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You got somewhere to stay?" Megan set her trunk down beside the cart. "I'm looking. Is there a boarding house in town?" "Widow Harmon runs one. 2 blocks east, yellow door." The woman held out a roll. "You look like you haven't eaten since Missouri." Megan almost laughed. "Kentucky, actually." She took the roll. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. You can pay me back sometime." The woman waved a hand. "Name's Dottie Graves. I'm here most mornings." "Megan Foster." She bit into the roll. It was still warm. She hadn't realized until that moment how hungry she was, or how much a small kindness could cut right through her. "Thank you, Mrs. Graves." "Miss?" Dottie corrected pleasantly. "Never married. And don't thank me yet. Widow Harmon charges a fair rate, but she's particular about her rules. No men past the parlor, no cooking in the rooms, and she doesn't like it if you're loud after 8. "That suits me fine," Megan said. Widow Harmon's boarding house had a yellow door as advertised, and a porch with 2 rocking chairs, and a cat sleeping across the doormat like she owned the place. The widow herself answered Megan's knock, a tall woman in her 60s with iron gray hair, and the look of someone who had seen enough of life's complications to stop being surprised by any of them. She looked at Megan, at the trunk, at Megan's leg, but without the particular calculation that Ethan Parker's look had carried, just taking stock. "You need a room?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I just arrived. The arrangement I'd made here in town didn't work out. I need a few days to find work." "What kind of work can you do?" "Cooking, sewing. I can keep accounts. I worked for a dry goods merchant in Dayton for 3 years. I can read, write, and do figures." "Can you ride?" Megan hesitated. "I manage." Widow Harmon studied her for another moment, then stepped back from the door. "Room's $1 a week, meals included. I'll need the first week up front." Megan counted out the dollar without letting her face show what losing it cost her. "Yes, ma'am." "What's your name?" "Megan Foster." "Where you from, Megan Foster?" "Ohio." "Long way to come." The widow's voice wasn't unkind. It was simply matter-of-fact, the way women in hard places spoke to other women who showed up on their doorsteps. "Room's at the top of the stairs left side. Supper's at 6. Don't be late. I don't keep plates warm." "I won't be late," Megan said. "Thank you, Mrs. Harmon." Widow Harmon. The older woman picked up the sleeping cat from the doormat with one practiced arm. Everyone calls me Widow Harmon. I earned that name and I intend to keep it." The room was small and clean, with a window that faced west and filled with orange light in the late afternoon. Megan sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap and let herself think clearly for the first time since she'd stepped off that train. She had $10.40. 1 week of room and board paid. She needed work, and she needed it fast. The next morning she was downstairs at 5:30 before any of the other boarders had stirred, and she asked Widow Harmon if she could help with breakfast in exchange for a few extra days of credit on the room. The widow looked at her over the rim of her coffee cup for a long moment. "You know how to make biscuits. My mother's recipe." "Then get the flour down from that shelf and show me." By the time the other 3 boarders came down, Megan had turned out 2 pans of biscuits that the widow ate 2 of herself without comment, which Megan took as high praise. After breakfast, she asked about work. "There's the laundry on 4th Street, Widow Harmon said, stacking plates. "Millicent Greer runs it. She's hard to work for, but she pays on time. There's also Mrs. Purcell's dressmaking shop. She's been looking for someone who can do detail work since her last girl left. And then there's—" She paused. "What?" Megan asked. "The Holloway Reed place out on the East Road. Sam Reed. He had an accident about 10 days ago, gashed his hand and arm bad on a piece of farm equipment. Infection set in. He's been laid up ever since, and his ranch hand quit on him last week. The animals need tending, and the house is going to ruin." Widow Harmon set the plates down and turned to look at Megan straight. "It's not exactly women's work. It's hard, and it's out of town, and Sam Reed is not an easy man to be around on his best days. On his sick days, I'm told he's something else entirely." "What does it pay?" Megan asked. "I don't know exactly. His neighbor Clem Dawes came in yesterday asking around if anyone knew a hand who could help out for a few weeks. I told him I didn't know of any, but if you went out there and offered yourself—" She stopped again. "What?" Megan said. "People would talk." Widow Harmon said simply, "A single woman out at a single man's ranch. You'd want to be clear about what the arrangement was." "The arrangement would be work," Megan said. "That's all." The widow looked at her for another long second, then turned back to the dishes. "Then go talk to Clem Dawes. He's at the livery most mornings. Tell him Clara Harmon sent you." Clem Dawes was a short, sunburned man with a worried look that seemed to be his permanent expression. He was at the livery, as the widow had said, and when Megan introduced herself and told him she was looking for work and had heard about the Reed Ranch, he stared at her like she'd offered to lasso the moon. "You're looking for ranch work," he said. "Caretaking work," she said. "I understand Mr. Reed is ill, and the place needs tending. I can cook, clean, manage a household, and I'm not afraid of animals. I grew up on a farm in Ohio. Ma'am, it's a hard situation out there. Sam's not—" He rubbed the back of his neck. "He ain't exactly in a welcoming condition right now. The fever's had him bad. He threw a water basin at the dock 2 days ago." "He threw it because he was afraid," Megan said. "Sick men get frightened. That's normal." Clem blinked at her. "You nursed before—" "My father was ill for 2 years before he passed. I know what it looks like." There was a long pause. Clem Dawes looked at her the way men in this town seemed to look at her, trying to figure out what category to put her in, because she didn't quite fit any of the ones they already had. Then he said, "Pay would be $5 a week. You'd stay out there. There's a room off the kitchen separate from the main house. Proper separate," he added quickly. "Sam's a decent man when he's himself. He'd want it done right." $5 a week and the separate room," Megan said. "I'll start today if you can take me out there." He took her out in his wagon that afternoon. The Reed Ranch was 4 miles from town, on a road that was more dust than road, edged on both sides by scrub and rock and the occasional stand of juniper. When the ranch buildings came into view, Megan could see immediately what Clem had meant about the place going to ruin. The fence along the south paddock was down in 2 places. The garden to the left of the house was choked with weeds. A water trough near the barn had gone green. "How many animals?" she asked. "2 horses, 4 head of cattle, a dozen chickens, and a mule named Bess, who bites if you come up on her left side." Clem set the brake on the wagon. "The horses have been watered. I've been coming out every day for that, but the rest has been left." "I'll start with the chickens," she said. "And then I'll see about Mr. Reed." "You sure you want to go in there?" Megan climbed down from the wagon, careful with her left leg on the uneven ground, and picked up her bag. "Mr. Dawes, I've come 1,000 miles and had a worse morning than most people have in a year. I am quite sure I can handle a sick man with a fever." She found Sam Reed in the back bedroom of the ranch house in a state that told her immediately that nobody had checked on him properly in at least a day. He was lying on top of the blankets in his clothes, his right arm wrapped in a bandage that had gone dark with old drainage, his face running with sweat. The room was stifling. The window closed, the air thick and stale. He was muttering something low and continuous that she couldn't make out. She crossed to the window first and pushed it open. The hot outside air rushed in, but it was moving air, and that was better. She turned to the side table. Empty water pitcher. She went to the kitchen, filled it, came back and poured a glass. "Mr. Reed?" She sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed and spoke clearly. "My name is Megan Foster. Mr. Dawes sent me out to help. I'm going to give you some water." He turned his head. His eyes were glassy with fever, dark with exhaustion, and she saw even through all of that they were very dark brown, almost black, and that they were trying hard to focus on her face. He was a big man. Even laid low like this, she could see it broad through the shoulders, long-limbed with hands that were roughened from years of work. The left hand was curled at his side. The right was the one wrapped in bandage. "Who sent you?" His voice was rough, barely more than a scrape of sound. "Mr. Dawes. I'm here to help with the ranch and to look after you until you're back on your feet. Don't need—" He started to push himself up and stopped, breathing hard. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was firm and quiet. The same voice she had used with her father. The voice that meant she was not going to argue, but she was also not going to be moved. "Lie back down. You're not getting up today." He stared at her. "You're awful bossy for somebody I never invited." "You didn't invite me." "Mr. Dawes did. Drink this water." He stared at her for another second. Then, with what looked like enormous and slightly resentful effort, he laid his head back down. She held the glass to his lips. He drank, and some of it spilled, and she wiped it up without comment, and he watched her the whole time with those glassy dark eyes. "How long you planning to stay?" he rasped. "Until you're on your feet," she said, "or until you can find someone better." She set the glass down. "I'm going to look at that bandage now." "You a nurse?" "No, but I know what an infection looks like, and I know what to do about one." She reached for his arm carefully. "This is going to hurt. I'm sorry in advance." He hissed through his teeth when she unwrapped it. The wound beneath was bad, deep and red and swollen, weeping at the edges, the skin around it hot and taut. Megan looked at it without letting her face show anything except concentration. "Have you been keeping it clean?" she asked. "Been trying," he said. "Ain't easy when your arm won't work right and the doc's visits cost $3 a time." "I'll clean it," she said. "I'll need to get some supplies from my bag. Don't move that arm." "You bossy with everybody," he muttered to the ceiling. "Only with people who need it," she said, and went to get her bag. She cleaned the wound with carbolic solution she'd brought from the widow's house. She'd asked for it that morning, not certain then what she would find, but glad now that she had. Sam Reed bore it with his jaw locked tight, and his left hand fisted in the blanket, and his eyes fixed on some point above the window. He made one sound, sharp and involuntary, when she reached the deepest part of the wound, and then pressed his lips together and said nothing else. "You're being very brave," she said, and immediately felt foolish for it too much, like something you said to a child. But he let out a short, rough sound that might have been a laugh. "Don't patronize me, Miss Foster. Megan Foster. Miss Foster." His voice was a little clearer now. The water had helped. "Where you from?" "Ohio." "Long way from Ohio." "Yes," she said. "It is. What brought you to Copper Springs?" She was quiet for a moment, focused on rebandaging his arm, keeping her hands steady. "A mistake," she said finally. "But I'm here now, so I might as well make myself useful." He turned his head to look at her. She didn't meet his gaze, kept her attention on the bandage. But she felt his eyes on her, not the calculating look that Ethan Parker had given her, not measuring her against what she lacked. Something else, something quieter. "You're going to be all right," she said. She tied off the bandage and sat back. "The infection is bad, but it hasn't gone to the blood yet. If we keep it clean and you drink enough water and eat something, your body can fight the rest. You're strong." He was quiet for a moment. "You can tell that, just from looking." "I can tell you're not the kind of man who stays down easy," she said. "That counts for something." The ghost of something, not quite a smile, not quite crossed his face, and disappeared. "You're a strange woman, Miss Foster." "I've been told." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I'm going to feed the chickens and check on the cattle. Then I'll make you something to eat. Is there food in the kitchen?" "Beans, some salt pork, cornmeal maybe?" "That'll do." She picked up her bag. "Don't get up." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and this time she was almost certain it was dry and almost certain it was meant to make her smile, and she did briefly privately with her back already turned to him as she walked to the door. Outside, in the full blaze of the afternoon sun, she stood for a moment and let herself breathe. The ranch was quiet, except for the distant complaint of the chickens and the low movement of cattle in the far paddock. The mountains to the north were purple and enormous against the white sky. The air smelled like dust and juniper, and something she was beginning to identify as this particular corner of the world. She had $11.40 this morning. Now she had a job and a room and a purpose, and a man inside that house who needed someone whether he was ready to admit it or not. Megan Foster picked up the feed bucket and got to work. By the time the sun was going red in the west, she had fed the chickens, checked the cattle, mended one section of the fallen fence with wire she found in the barn, and made a pot of beans with salt pork that filled the kitchen with a smell that was warm and plain and decent. She brought a bowl in to Sam Reed on a tray, with more water and a piece of the hardtack she'd found in the cupboard. He was more alert now. The fever was still there, she could see it in the high color of his face, but his eyes were clearer, tracking her properly as she came in. "You fixed the fence," he said. He'd heard her apparently working out there. "One section," she said. "The south side has 2 more that need work. I'll get to them tomorrow." She set the tray across his lap. "Eat that." He looked at the bowl. "Beans." "Yes. I've had nothing but beans for a week." "Then you'll be grateful I put salt pork in these," she said, and sat back down in the chair. He picked up the spoon. He was quiet while he ate, which she appreciated. She'd learned that about men when her father was ill. Some of them needed to talk through everything, and some of them needed quiet. And the quiet ones were often harder to read, but easier to be around. After a few minutes, Sam Reed said without looking up from the bowl, "You don't have to stay in the room." "I know," she said. "I ain't going to fall apart if you go sit somewhere else." "I know that too." She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not sitting here because I think you will. I'm sitting here because I want to make sure you finish that bowl." He glanced at her then. That same quiet, measuring look. "You always this stubborn?" "Always," she said. He went back to the beans. And outside the desert, night came in fast and cool, the stars appearing one by one above the mountains. And inside that small plain room, the only sounds were the scrape of a spoon against a bowl and the distant call of something moving through the dark. And Megan Foster sat in her chair and breathed slowly and thought that maybe, just maybe, she had found the right place to survive after all. She did not let herself think further than that. Not yet. Surviving was enough for one day. Sam Reed finished the entire bowl. He handed it back without a word. But when she stood to go, he said quietly, "Thank you, Miss Foster." She paused at the door. "You're welcome, Mr. Reed." She blew out the lamp and left him to sleep, and walked through the dark house to her small room off the kitchen, and sat on the narrow bed, and did not cry. She had used up her 1 minute this morning on that platform. She was not going to borrow another one. Tomorrow there was more fence to mend, more animals to tend, and a man with a bad arm and a worse fever who needed someone steady. She was going to be steady. That was what she did. Megan Foster lay down in her clothes, closed her eyes, and slept like a woman who had already decided to stay. Sam Reed slept through the night without throwing anything, which Megan decided to count as a victory. She was up before dawn, moving quietly through the kitchen, stoking the stove, and getting water on to boil. Her back ached from the narrow mattress, and her left hip was complaining the way it always did, after hard physical work. But she had learned a long time ago not to negotiate with her body when there was something that needed doing. She just moved through it. She checked on him first thing. He was sleeping on his back, breathing slow, and even his color still too high, but not the alarming red it had been the evening before. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead, without waking him, still hot, but not burning the way it had been when she arrived. That was something. She changed the dressing on his arm as carefully as she could while he slept, and he stirred only once, muttered something she couldn't make out, and went back under. She let him sleep. Sleep was the one thing she couldn't give him herself, and his body needed it badly. By the time the sun was fully up, she had the second section of the south fence mended, the horses watered and checked, and a pan of cornbread in the oven. She had also discovered that the mule named Bess was exactly as advertised. She came up on the animal's left side exactly once out of inattention, and Bess swung her big gray head around with a look of pure intention. Megan stepped back fast enough, barely. "I see we understand each other," she told the mule. Bess flicked an ear and went back to her feed. Sam was awake when she brought his breakfast in. Sitting up this time, which was progress, though the effort it had clearly cost him, was written all over his face. He had his jaw set the way men did when they were trying to look like they weren't in pain. "You shouldn't be sitting up yet," Megan said. "Good morning to you too, Miss Foster." She set the tray down across his lap. "Your color is better. The fever broke some overnight. That's good." She handed him the water first. "Drink." "You know," he said, taking the glass. "Most people say good morning before they start giving orders. Most people don't have a fence that needs mending and chickens that need feeding before 8 o'clock. She pulled the chair close and sat. "How does your arm feel?" "Like it got chewed on by something unfriendly." He looked at the fresh bandage. "You changed it while I was sleeping." "You needed it changed. You were sleeping. It seemed like the obvious choice." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him processing that a stranger in his house, moving through his space, making decisions about his body while he was unconscious. Most men would have bristled at that. He just looked at her steadily, like he was trying to figure out what kind of person would do that without being asked. "You from a medical family?" he said. "No. My father was a farmer. He got sick when I was 20. My mother had already passed by then, so it was just the two of us. I learned what I needed to learn." She kept her voice even. "Eat the cornbread." He picked up the fork. "What kind of sick?" His heart. It was slow, not sudden. 2 years of watching him get smaller. She folded her hands in her lap. "He passed 3 years ago." Sam Reed chewed and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." It was his time, she said. It was the thing she had learned to say because it closed the conversation politely, and it was even mostly true. "Do you have family?" "Mr. Reed? Someone who should know you're ill." Something happened in his face. It was fast, a tightening, a flicker of something dark, and then it was gone, and he was just eating again, looking at the cornbread. "No," he said. "Nobody needs to know." She noted the deflection and filed it away. All right. She stood. I'm going to check on the cattle again after breakfast. Clem Dawes stopped by yesterday evening while you were asleep, he said. The east water line has been running weak, and you might have a break somewhere in the pipe. Sam's head came up. The east line. If that line's broke, the whole lower pasture's going dry. I know. I'll walk it this morning and look for where the break is. That's half a mile of pipe, he said. Miss Foster. Then I'd better start early. She picked up her bag from beside the chair. Finish that cornbread. All of it. And don't try to get out of that bed. If you fall and reopen that arm, we'll be back to the beginning, and I'd rather not spend another evening cleaning out a wound that deep. He stared at her. You are the most. Eat, she said, and walked out. She found the break in the east line about 40 minutes later, which was good news because it was findable, and bad news because it was in the hardest possible place to fix, without tools she wasn't sure the ranch had. She followed the pipe back from the break toward the barn, checking the tool shed on the way, and found enough fitting material and rope to do a temporary repair that would hold until Sam was on his feet. She was on her knees in the dirt working the repair when she heard boots on the ground behind her. She turned, and Ethan Parker was standing 10 feet away. He had his hat in his hands and a look on his face that she recognized, though she had never seen it on him before. It was the look of a man rehearsing something who'd had a speech ready and was suddenly not sure where to start. Megan stood up. She did not rush. She dusted her hands on her skirt and faced him squarely. Mr. Parker, she said. Miss Foster. He turned the hat in his hands. I heard you were out here, at the Sam Reed place. That's right. Working. Also right. He looked at the pipe, the tools, her dirty hands and knees. Something moved in his face that might have been shame, or might have been something he'd mistaken for it. I wanted to say, Mr. Parker. Her voice was level and not unkind and completely immovable. Whatever you came to say, I'd appreciate it if you said it plainly. I have a lot of work left this morning. He let out a slow breath. I came to apologize. What I did at the station was wrong. I know that. Megan looked at him. She thought of the platform of his eyes dropping to her leg of the folded kerchief. She thought of standing around that corner of the depot building with her hand pressed to her eyes. I accept your apology, she said. He blinked. He had clearly expected more than that argument maybe, or tears, or something he could respond to. Just like that. What would you prefer? Shall I be angry longer so you feel like you've properly atoned? He looked away. No, I thought you'd have more to say. I've been busy, she said simply. And honestly, Mr. Parker, what happened at the station was a service to both of us. I don't think we'd have suited each other. He looked back at her then, and she saw something complicated moving behind his eyes. Wounded pride, maybe, or genuine regret. She wasn't sure it mattered much now either way. Is there anything I can do? He said. To help. With here, the ranch. Mr. Reed has what he needs, she said. But thank you. She bent back down to the pipe. I need to finish this repair. Safe travels, Mr. Parker. There was a pause. Then she heard his boots retreating back up the path. She didn't watch him go. She got the repair done, washed her hands at the trough, and went back inside to check on Sam. He was not in the bedroom. She found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter, his good arm braced against the wood and his face the color of old wax. He had gotten himself upright and halfway across the house on sheer stubbornness, and it had clearly cost him everything he had. Mr. Reed. She was across the kitchen in 4 steps. What on earth? I heard voices, he said. Outside. I heard a man's voice and I wanted to... He stopped. He was breathing too hard. You wanted to what? She got her shoulder under his arm without asking permission. Come on, back to bed, now. I'm fine. You are not fine. You are white as a sheet, and you're about to fall on that arm, and I will not spend another hour cleaning that wound. She steered him firmly toward the bedroom. "Who did you think was out there? What were you doing?" "I don't know, I just—" He let her guide him, which told her how bad he actually felt. "I heard a man's voice. I didn't know who was out here with you." She got him sat on the edge of the bed. "It was Ethan Parker. He came to apologize." Sam looked up at her. "Parker? Ethan Parker, the rancher? What does he have to apologize to you for?" She hadn't meant to say it. It came out because she was flustered and moving fast, and she hadn't thought. She straightened up, stepped back slightly. "He and I had a prior acquaintance," she said. "It's resolved now." Sam Reed watched her face the way he'd been watching it since she arrived, like he was reading something written in a language he hadn't quite learned yet. "He's the one who brought you out to Copper Springs." It wasn't a question. She met his gaze. "Yes." Another silence. She could hear him putting the pieces together, the mail order arrangement, the platform, the woman who'd shown up alone at Widow Harmon's and then come out to a sick man's ranch inside of 24 hours. "Did he—" He stopped, visibly choosing his words. "Did he treat you badly?" "He changed his mind," she said. "Lie down, Mr. Reed." "That ain't an answer." "It's the answer you're getting." She reached past him for the extra blanket folded at the foot of the bed. "He changed his mind and I found other work. Lie down." Sam lay down, but he kept watching her, and there was something in his face now that hadn't been there before, a kind of careful, deliberate attention. Like he had filed something away for later and intended to come back to it. "You should have sent for the doc," he said finally. "Yesterday, when you first got here, that arm might have needed—" "The arm needed cleaning and rest and time," she said. "The same things I gave it. The doctor charges $3 a visit, and you said yourself you've been paying for his visits already. What I did was sufficient." She met his eyes. "Is that a complaint, Mr. Reed?" "No," he said after a pause. "It's not." "Then get some rest." She was almost at the door when he said quietly, "Miss Foster." She turned. "That man Parker." His voice was steady and low and careful. "He turned you away because of your leg." It wasn't a question this time either. She held very still. "That's a reasonable guess," she said. "It's not a guess." He looked at her directly, no sideways glance, no calculation straight on like he was making certain she understood. "A man who'd do that isn't worth 1 minute of your time. I want you to know I think that." The words hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for. She had spent so much of the last 2 days holding herself together by not thinking too hard about what had happened on that platform. Not the act itself, which she could manage, but the specific shame of it. The particular way it had confirmed a fear she'd carried since she was old enough to understand that the world made certain judgments about her body. And now this rough, stubborn, sick man who barely knew her name was looking at her from a sickbed and saying it plainly, like it was simply a fact. She kept her face still. "Thank you," she said. "Rest now." She walked to the kitchen and stood at the stove with her back to the room and her hands flat on the counter, and breathed slowly until she was steady again. She had work to do. There was always work to do. That afternoon, Clem Dawes came by with a sack of supplies, flour, sugar, a tin of lard, and stood on the porch talking to Megan for a few minutes about the state of the ranch, filling in pieces of the picture she hadn't had yet. "Sam Reed came out here about 6 years ago," Clem said, leaning against the porch post. "Built the place himself mostly. He ain't from Arizona originally. Kansas, I think, or Nebraska. Nobody's quite sure. He don't talk about his past much." "What about family?" she asked. "He said there's nobody to contact." Clem's face shifted. He was quiet for a beat. "He had a sister," he said. "Margaret. She was living out here with him for a while, couple years back. She got sick in the winter. Fever." He paused. "She didn't make it through spring." Megan was very still. "He lost his sister. She was young, 22, 23 maybe. It hit Sam hard. He got quieter after, kept more to himself. Clem looked out over the yard. He had a woman too before Margaret passed. A woman from town. After Margaret died, she left. Said she couldn't. I don't know the whole of it. Just that she left and he's been out here alone since. Megan said nothing for a moment. Thank you for telling me, she said. I ain't telling you to pry, Clem said quickly. I'm telling you so you understand why he is the way he is, so you don't take it personal if he's difficult. He hasn't been difficult, she said. He's been sick. Clem looked at her with something like surprise. Most folks find him hard to warm up to. Most folks probably don't give him enough credit, she said. That night, Sam's fever climbed again. She checked on him at 9 and found him restless, moving against the blankets, his breathing short and uneven, his forehead slick with sweat. She got the water, got the cloth, and sat beside him in the dark, working to bring his temperature down the slow and patient way. Somewhere around midnight, he spoke. He said a name, low and rough and wrecked with sleep. Margaret. Megan's hand went still on the cloth. He said it again, quieter this time, like something escaping through a crack he hadn't meant to leave open. Margaret, I'm sorry. I tried. She wrung the cloth out in the basin and placed it carefully back against his forehead. She did not speak. She didn't think he would hear her if she did. But then, without opening his eyes, in a voice that was halfway between the fever and somewhere else entirely. I should have been there. I should have been there when she... Shh, Megan said very softly. You're all right. I wasn't there. His voice cracked on the words. I was in town. I left her alone, and when I got back she was already... Sam. She said his name without thinking. Not Mr. Reed. Just Sam, the same way she had learned to speak to her father in the hardest nights, quietly, directly, like you were reaching through the fever to the person underneath. You're here. You're safe. Rest now. His breathing steadied slowly. The line between his brows eased. His head turned slightly into the pillow toward the cool cloth, and his face went slack with exhausted sleep. Megan sat with her hands in her lap for a long time after that. She had come here to do a job. She had come here because she had $11.40 and no other options. She had not come here to care about this man and his grief, and the name he called out in his fever, the sister he hadn't been able to save, and the guilt that had clearly been living in him ever since. But there it was, settled somewhere in her chest without her permission, quiet and inconvenient, and entirely too real. She thought about Clem's words on the porch. She thought about what it was to be a person who had loved someone and lost them before you'd finished needing them. She understood that weight. She had carried her own version of it for 3 years, in a different form with her father's face instead of a sister's. She pressed her fingers briefly to the bridge of her nose. She had told herself last night that surviving was enough for one day. She'd meant it as a limit. Don't reach further than what's in front of you. Don't let yourself want anything that hasn't offered itself. That was how she'd gotten through the platform, through Ethan Parker's turned back, through a sleepless night, in a strange room. But something was shifting. She could feel it, subtle and a little frightening, the way the ground shifts before you realize you've walked to the edge of something. She put the feeling aside. There was time to examine it later. Right now, there was a cloth to re-wring and water to refill, and a man who needed someone steady. That was what she did. She was steady. She was still in the chair when the first gray light started coming through the bedroom window, and Sam Reed woke to find her there, sitting upright, with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes open, watching the dawn come in. He stared at her for a long moment. His color was better. The fever had finally broken. Really broken sometime in the hours she'd been sitting there. She'd felt the shift in him around 3 in the morning. The heat easing his breathing, deepening to something that sounded like actual sleep instead of fitful fever exhaustion. You stayed all night, he said. His voice was rough with sleep, low and quiet. Yes, she said. Why? She looked at him. Because you needed someone here. Something passed through his face, complicated and fast, and difficult to read in the early light. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You didn't have to. I know that, she said. Are you hungry? He held her gaze for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then, yeah, he said. I could eat. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and went to make breakfast. And Sam Reed lay in his bed and watched the ceiling, and didn't say another word. But when she came back with the tray 20 minutes later, he was still watching the doorway she'd walked through with a look on his face that he hadn't had the presence of mind to put away yet. She pretended not to notice. But she did. The fever didn't come back. That was the first thing Megan checked every morning, her hand to his forehead, before he was fully awake, before either of them had said a word. By the fourth day, his skin was cool and dry under her palm, and she felt the tight knot in her chest ease another fraction. By the fifth day, he was arguing with her about getting out of bed, which she took as the clearest possible sign that he was recovering. I need to check the north pasture, he said, pushing the blanket back with his good arm. You need to finish that broth, she said, pushing it back. Miss Foster. Mr. Reed. He looked at her. She looked at him. It had become a particular kind of standoff between them. Not hostile, not exactly, but charged with something that neither of them had named yet. He would push. She would hold. He would find every single time that she was not going to move. The north pasture can wait one more day, she said. Clem checked it yesterday. The cattle are fine. Clem doesn't know my cattle the way I do. Then tell me what to look for, and I'll check it myself this afternoon. He opened his mouth, closed it. You'd do that. I'd do that, she said. Now finish the broth. He finished the broth, but she caught him watching her as she moved around the room, and the look on his face was something she had started noticing, and then immediately made herself stop noticing because she couldn't afford to follow that particular thread anywhere it might lead. On the sixth morning, she came in with his breakfast and found the bed empty. Her heart lurched. She set the tray down fast and went through the house. Kitchen empty, parlor empty, and pushed open the front door to find Sam Reed standing on the porch in the early morning light, fully dressed, his good arm braced against the post and his eyes on the mountains to the north. He had managed his shirt buttons one-handed, which she imagined had taken him a solid 20 minutes. You got dressed, she said. Took me half an hour, he said. But yes. She came to stand beside him, not too close. How do you feel? Like a man who's been in bed for 2 weeks. He exhaled slowly. But better, clearer. He glanced at her sideways. Thanks to you. She said nothing. Outside compliments made her uncomfortable in a way she'd never quite resolved. She never knew what to do with them, whether to deflect or accept, and both options felt wrong in different ways. The arm, she asked instead. Sore, but the heat's gone out of it. He lifted it slightly, testing the range of movement, and she saw his jaw tighten at the pull of it. You did a good job. The arm did a good job, she said. I just kept it clean. He looked at her then fully the way he'd been doing more often in the last couple of days, direct and steady, and with something unresolved in it. You've been here 6 days, he said. Yes. You mended the south fence, fixed the east water line, fed every animal on this property twice a day, made 3 meals a day, sat up with me through 2 bad nights. He paused. And you haven't complained once. I'm not much of a complainer, she said. Most people would have left. I'm not most people. He was quiet for a moment. The morning was coming up clear and hot, the way every morning came up out here. She had started to learn the rhythms of this land, the way the heat built slow from the east, the way the dry air smelled different in the early hours before the sun got high, the particular sound the wind made when it moved through the junipers at the edge of the property. Why did you stay? He asked. Really? You could have taken work at the laundry, or the dressmakers, in town closer to people easier work. He kept his eyes on the mountains. Why'd you come out here to a sick man's ranch? She considered the honest answer. Because I needed the money, she said. And because I wasn't afraid of it. And now? The question landed quietly and sat there between them. Now I have a job that needs finishing, she said. You're not back on your feet yet, not fully. He looked at her, and she looked back and didn't look away, because she had learned that looking away was how you signaled weakness, and she had not survived the last 6 days by signaling weakness. All right, he said finally. Then stay until I'm back on my feet. That's the arrangement, she said. Right. He pushed off the post carefully. Then let's say the arrangement includes you teaching me the exercises that Doc said I'm supposed to do with this arm since I threw the paper he wrote it on across the room. Despite herself, she almost smiled. You threw the paper. I was feverish. You throw things a lot when you're feverish. I threw one thing. He paused. That I'll admit to. She did smile then briefly and turned to go back inside. Come eat your breakfast, then we'll work on the arm. She was not prepared for what happened that afternoon. She had been working in the garden, the vegetable garden on the west side of the house, which she'd been clearing piece by piece in the late afternoons, while Sam did his arm exercises on the porch and tried to pretend the exercises weren't exhausting him. She was pulling up the second row of choked weeds when she heard a horse coming up the road, too fast for a social call. The rider was a woman. Young, maybe 25, in a good riding dress that had seen better days, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. She pulled her horse up at the fence and looked at the house, and then looked at Megan in the garden, and something in her face did a complicated thing. Is Sam Reed here? She said. Her voice was slightly breathless from the ride. He is, Megan said, straightening. May I ask who's calling? The woman looked at her steadily. Clara Whitfield. She stopped. I used to know him. I heard he was sick. I came to see how he was. Megan set down the weeding tool. She kept her voice even and her face neutral. He's recovering. He's been on his feet since this morning. Something moved in Clara Whitfield's face relief, or something close to it. Can I see him? There was no reason to say no. No reason at all, except the thing Megan was very carefully not looking at in her own chest, which tightened just slightly at the sight of this woman on her horse asking to see Sam with that particular expression on her face. Of course, Megan said. I'll let him know you're here. She found Sam in the parlor doing the arm rotation the doc had prescribed, slow and deliberate, his face set against the discomfort of it. He looked up when she came in. You have a visitor, Megan said. Clara Whitfield. The change in Sam's face was immediate. Every muscle went still. What? She rode in just now, said she heard you were sick and came to see you. He stared at Megan for a full 3 seconds. Then he set his arm down carefully and stood up. Tell her I'll be right out. Megan went back to the garden. She did not go to this porch. She did not listen. She pulled weeds with steady, methodical hands, and she told herself that what Sam Reed did and who came to see him was entirely his business and none of hers, and she nearly believed it. Clem Dawes had told her. The woman who left after Margaret died. Who'd said she couldn't, and then hadn't finished the sentence, and Megan hadn't pressed because she'd understood that some sentences were like that. You didn't need the end of them. She worked for 20 minutes before she heard the horse leave. Sam came out to the garden without her going to look for him. He stood at the edge of the cleared rows, and she looked at him once quickly, and then back at the ground. His face was closed. Not the closed-off blank he'd worn when she first arrived. This was something different. Something that had been forced shut from the inside. She wanted to come back, he said. Not a question. Just a statement offered flat and direct. Megan stopped pulling. She looked up at him. What did you tell her? I told her there was nothing to come back to. His voice was even. I told her I was being looked after, and I was getting back on my feet, and I didn't need anything from her." She held his gaze. "Was that the truth?" "Which part?" "Any of it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crouched down beside the garden row, his good arm resting on his knee. "Clara left when I needed somebody most," he said. "After Margaret. She said she couldn't handle—" He stopped, started again. "She said grief made me impossible to be around, that I'd shut her out." A pause. "She wasn't wrong about that last part. But she still left." "She still left?" He picked up a stone from the edge of the row and turned it over in his fingers. I'm not angry at her for it anymore. It just—" He set the stone down. "You can't go back to somebody who showed you what they do when things get hard." The words fell into the quiet afternoon and sat there. Megan looked at her hands in the soil. She thought of Ethan Parker's kerchief folded into a tight square. She thought of the platform. She thought of the particular cruelty of people who make decisions about you before you've had a chance to be anything to them. "No," she said softly. "You can't." They stayed like that for a moment, her kneeling in the dirt, him crouching at the edge of the row, and the afternoon went on around them. Then Sam said, "You came from Ohio for a man who turned you away on a train platform." She looked at him sharply. "Clem told me," he said. Not apologetically, just honestly. "He told me what Parker did. I put it together with what you said that coming here was a mistake." She held very still. I'm not saying it to pry," he said. "I'm saying it because—" He stopped, looked at the stone he'd set down. "Because I know what it is to have somebody look at you and decide you're not worth the trouble. And I know what it costs you to keep walking after that." The air went out of her. Just briefly, just one moment where everything she'd been holding up for 6 days went soft and unsteady. "I kept walking," she said. "I know you did." His voice was quiet. "I watched you walk out of that bedroom every morning for 6 days and go do things that needed doing. I wasn't in any state to tell you I noticed, but I noticed." She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. She refused flatly and absolutely to cry in this man's garden. "Mr. Reed." "Sam," he said. She looked at him. "We've been through enough," he said. "That I think you can call me Sam." A beat of silence. "Sam," she said. And his name in her own voice sounded like something she hadn't said enough, something she hadn't known she'd been waiting to say. "Megan," he said, equally quiet, testing it, like he was making sure it fit. She looked back at the garden. "I need to finish this row before the light goes." "I know," he said. He didn't move immediately. Then he stood carefully mindful of his arm and said, "I'll check on the horses." "Don't lift anything with that arm," she called after him. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and she could hear without seeing it that he was almost smiling. That night he sat at the kitchen table while she cooked, which was new. He'd been eating in the bedroom until today. He sat with his arm resting on the table and watched her work, and they talked. Actually talked the way they hadn't been able to before, when he was fighting the fever, and she was fighting her own particular battle to keep everything professional and appropriate and carefully contained. He told her about the ranch, how he'd come out to Arizona 6 years ago with $100 and an idea and built the place from almost nothing. The cattle he'd built the herd from. The water system he'd engineered himself, which was why the broken pipe had bothered him so much. He'd laid every inch of it. She told him about Dayton, the dry goods store where she'd worked the accounts, the 2-room house she'd shared with her father in his last years, the way she'd made the decision to answer the advertisement sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a newspaper and a particular kind of quiet desperation that she'd told herself was really just practicality. "Were you scared?" he asked. "To come all the way out here for a man you'd never met?" "Terrified," she said without hesitation. "But staying where I was scared me more." He was quiet for a moment. "What scared you about staying?" She stirred the pot. The smallness of it, she said. It was fine. It was perfectly fine. But I could see every day of the rest of my life from the front porch, and I didn't like what I saw. What did you see? Nothing wrong, she said. Just nothing. He understood that. She could tell from the way he nodded, not the polite nod of someone moving a conversation along, but the nod of someone who recognized something. I left Kansas for the same reason, he said. Nothing wrong, just nothing. He looked at his hand. Margaret came out to join me after the first year. She was the kind of person who made things feel possible. Everything she touched. He stopped. Megan kept her voice gentle. What was she like? Stubborn, he said, and the word carried so much feeling in it, grief and love, and something like laughter all compressed into one word. Completely immovable once she'd made up her mind. Laughed at everything. Terrible cook. He smiled briefly at the table. She tried to make bread once, and the result was, I don't know how you make bread come out gray, but she managed it. Megan laughed, a real one, short and genuine. Gray bread. Gray. Solid gray. I still don't know what happened. Did you eat it? Every bite. He looked up. I wasn't going to tell her it was bad. They looked at each other across the table, and something in the room had shifted. Something that had been tightly wound was looser now, and the space between them felt different than it had. Closer. Not uncomfortably so. Just closer. Then his face changed. She saw it happen, the warmth going slightly guarded, something careful coming into his eyes. He looked back at the table. She died in February, he said quietly. I was in town. There was a supply run I'd been putting off, and the weather had cleared, and I thought she was getting better. The fever had come down the day before. He picked up his coffee cup with his good hand. When I got back, she was gone. She'd been gone for hours. Megan was still. She remembered his voice in the dark. I should have been there. I tried. It wasn't your fault, she said. I know that, he said. I know it here. He touched his temple. It's getting it here that takes longer. His hand moved to his chest. He said it flatly, not for sympathy, just as a fact about himself. Yes, Megan said. I know exactly what you mean. He looked at her. Your father. He told me not to sit with him that last night, she said. Said he was fine, said I needed to sleep. I believed him because I wanted to. She folded her hands around her own cup. I woke up in the morning and he was gone. He'd been gone for hours. The kitchen was very quiet. Sam reached across the table and covered her folded hands with his briefly, once not romantic, not presuming. Just a contact, direct and honest and human. She felt it go straight through her like something she hadn't known she was cold without. Then he pulled his hand back. I'm sorry, he said. About your father. I'm sorry about Margaret, she said. Outside, the desert night had settled in, fully deep and dark and enormous. The kind of darkness that existed only in places far from cities where the sky showed you its whole self. Inside, the stove ticked and the lamp burned low, and Megan Foster and Sam Reed sat across from each other in the kitchen he'd built himself on land he'd made something out of by sheer will. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt entirely alone. She was clearing the supper things when she noticed an envelope on the kitchen shelf half tucked behind the flour tin, addressed in an official hand. It had been there since she arrived, she realized. She'd moved it once to clean the shelf and put it back without thinking. She looked at it now, and something in the official lettering caught her differently. The return address, Copper Springs Land and Title Office. Sam was still at the table. She turned. Sam, this letter on the shelf, when did it come? He looked up. His expression shifted. About 2 weeks ago, before the accident. Have you opened it? A pause. No. She looked at him. Why not? His jaw tightened. Because I know what it says. She crossed to the table and set it in front of him. Tell me. He looked at the envelope. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, There's a man named Aldous Vickers. He's been buying up land on the east side of town, been doing it for 2 years. He bought out 3 ranchers already. 2 of them left after their water rights got disputed. One stayed and had his cattle fence cut 3 times in a month. Sam's voice was flat and controlled the voice of a man being very deliberate about not letting something loose. I got an offer from him 6 months ago. I turned it down. He pushed the envelope with one finger. This is probably the next step. Megan picked it up. May I? He nodded. She opened it. She read it once, then twice. Then she set it down on the table and looked at him. He's claiming a boundary dispute, she said. He says the eastern edge of your property, 20 acres of it, was improperly surveyed when you filed and legally belongs to an adjacent title he now holds. Sam's face had gone very still. He's offering to settle out of court, she said. For a price. What price? She turned the letter so he could read the number. He looked at it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then quietly, That's less than a quarter of what those 20 acres are worth. I know, she said. He's not settling, Sam said. He's taking. Yes, she said. He is. The word hung in the air between them. Megan looked at the letter, then at Sam, and she saw something she hadn't seen in him through all the fever and pain and slow recovery of the last 6 days. She saw something harden, not the brittle hardness of a sick man fighting his own body. Something else older and quieter and considerably more dangerous. How good is your original survey? She asked. He met her eyes. It's good. I was there when they ran it. I've got the documents. Then you fight it, she said. Vickers has money and lawyers and 2 years of practice at this. And you have a valid survey and 20 acres that are yours. She held his gaze. What do you want to do? He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp between them threw everything in warm, uneven light. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving through the junipers the way it did at night. I want to keep what I built, he said. Then we'll figure out how, she said. He looked at her. We? She hadn't meant to say it that way. But she found when she examined the word that she meant it. Yes, she said steadily. We. And Sam Reed looked at Megan Foster across the kitchen table, with the letter between them and the night pressing in from all sides, and something in his face, the last held back, guarded, once burned thing in it, shifted. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. All right, he said. Then we'll figure out how. The survey documents were in a cedar box under Sam's bed, which he retrieved himself the next morning before she could offer to get them moving carefully, but with a deliberateness that told her he needed to do it himself. He set the box on the kitchen table and opened it without ceremony. Inside were papers folded, worn at the creases, written in the careful hand of a government surveyor. He spread them flat with his good hand and stood back. There, he said. Copper Springs Land Survey, September 1878. Signed and stamped, every corner post marked. Megan leaned over the papers. She had spent 3 years keeping accounts for a dry goods merchant, columns of figures, inventory records, supplier contracts. She knew how to read a document, how to find the number that mattered inside a page of numbers that were meant to obscure it. She read the survey carefully, tracing the property lines with one finger, comparing them to the description in Vickers' letter. He's claiming the boundary starts at the creek bed, she said. My survey puts it 40 yards east of the creek. 40 yards. She straightened. That's not a small discrepancy. That's not a surveyor's error either. That's deliberate. Vickers didn't file that boundary dispute himself, Sam said. He's got a man at the land office. I've heard it from 2 other ranchers. They found paperwork filed against them that nobody could explain, numbers that didn't match their originals. By the time they tried to fight it, the legal fees had bled them dry. He picked up his coffee cup. That's the game. Not the lawsuit. The waiting. Then we don't wait, Megan said. He looked at her. It's not that simple. I didn't say it was simple. I said we don't wait. She looked back at the survey. Who was the original surveyor? The man who ran these lines. Fellow named Patrick Greer. He ran surveys all over this county in the 70s. Is he still in Copper Springs? A pause. Last I heard he was in Tucson, retired. A signed testimony from the original surveyor confirming his own work would be difficult for Vickers to dispute, she said, especially in front of a judge who hasn't already been purchased. She looked at him. Do you have money for a lawyer? Some, not much. Enough to get one to write a letter. He thought about it. Maybe. Then that's where we start. She folded Vickers' letter and set it aside. And in the meantime, you don't respond to this. Not one word. You don't acknowledge it. You don't negotiate. You don't give him anything to work with. Silence is the only answer until you have counsel. Sam watched her for a long moment. Where did you learn to think like this? 3 years of watching a man try to cheat my employer out of his supply contracts, she said. I did the books. I saw exactly how it worked. She met his eyes. The principle is the same. They rely on you panicking, on you responding before you're ready, on you giving them something to twist. He was quiet. She could see him absorbing it, fitting it against what he already knew. He wasn't a man who needed to be led by the hand, he needed information. And then he made his own decisions, and they were usually good ones. All right, he said. I'll ride into town tomorrow and find counsel. I'll come with you, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I can read legal language faster than most, she said. And I want to look at the land office records myself. If Vickers has someone inside that office, there may be a filing trail that contradicts his claim. Sam set his cup down. You're going to walk into the land office and ask to see their records. I'm going to walk into the land office and ask to see their records, she confirmed. They might not let you. They might not, she agreed. But most men underestimate a woman asking politely for paperwork. It's a consistent and useful flaw. He made a sound that was entirely a laugh, caught and swallowed too fast. He turned his face away briefly, and she saw the corner of his mouth before he controlled it. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she said. Now go do your arm exercises. They rode into Copper Springs the next morning in Sam's wagon, the survey documents in the cedar box, wrapped in oilcloth, and set carefully behind the seat. Sam drove one-handed, with an ease that suggested he'd done it before, and Megan sat beside him and watched the desert go by and thought about Aldous Vickers and what kind of man builds his holdings by dismantling other people's. The town looked different to her now than it had the day she'd stepped off the train. The heat was the same, the dust was the same, but she knew the names of the streets, knew which storefront belonged to whom, knew that Dottie Graves would be at her bread cart near the general store, and that Widow Harmon would be 3/4 of the way through her morning accounting by now. She'd been in Copper Springs less than 2 weeks, and it had already started to arrange itself into something that felt like hers. She noticed Ethan Parker's horse outside the hardware store as they passed. She did not mention it. Sam's jaw tightened slightly. He'd seen it too, and then they were past it, and neither of them spoke of it. The lawyer's name was Thomas Aldred. He had an office above the feed store, a small room with more books than furniture, and he listened to Sam lay out the situation with his fingers tented and his eyes sharp. He was older, 60 or so, with the manner of a man who had stopped being surprised by human nature some years ago. When Sam finished, Aldred looked at the survey documents for a long time without speaking. Then he said, Vickers has filed 3 similar claims in the last 18 months. 2 settled. 1 is still pending. The one still pending, Megan said. Who? A widow named Lucille Haas. She has 60 acres on the South Road. She's been holding on, but she's nearly out of money to keep fighting. If she and Sam presented a joint challenge, Megan said, would that change the legal position? Aldred looked at her with the particular attention of a man recalibrating. It might, he said slowly. Two independent property holders with two independent valid surveys making the same claim of fraudulent filing. He picked up his pen. That's a different argument than one man defending his own land. Can you reach Mrs. Haas? Sam asked. I can. Aldred made a note. There's also the surveyor question. If Patrick Greer is still competent to testify, a signed affidavit from him would significantly strengthen both cases. He's in Tucson, Sam said. Last I knew. Then we write to Tucson. Aldred set his pen down. Mr. Reed, what you're describing, what both you and Mrs. Haas are describing, points to someone with access to the land office filing system. That's not a legal problem. That's a criminal one. The word landed in the room. You're saying someone inside the land office is filing false documents, Megan said. I'm saying it's possible. If it can be proven, it changes the entire nature of this dispute. Aldred looked between them, which means the land office records themselves become evidence. You cannot let Vickers know you're looking at them. We weren't planning to tell him, Sam said. Good. Aldred closed his notebook. My fee for initial counsel is $2. If we take this to a formal challenge, it will be more. But let's see what the records show first. They paid the $2. They left. Outside on the boardwalk, Sam stood for a moment. The land office, he said. Give me an hour, she said. Megan. I'm not going to announce anything, she said. I'm going to go in and ask if I can see the public survey records for the East District because I'm considering purchasing property and I want to understand the boundary system. She looked at him steadily. That is not a lie, and it will get me a look at the filing dates. He looked at her for a long moment. You've got 10 minutes before I come in after you. Give me 20, she said, and wait at the wagon. The land office clerk was a young man with ink-stained fingers who barely looked up when she came in. She asked pleasantly about public survey records for the East District, citing a potential property interest, and he waved her toward a shelf of bound ledgers with the practiced indifference of someone who found his job deeply uninteresting. She worked fast. She found the ledger covering 1878 to 1882, the period of Sam's original filing, and she found his entry. Then she found the adjacent entries. Then she turned to the more recent volume and found Vickers's boundary dispute filing dated 4 months ago. The handwriting on the dispute filing was different from everything around it. Not different from Vickers's other filings, different from the other entries on the same page. Like it had been inserted after the fact by someone who'd left blank space for the purpose. She looked at it for a long time. She memorized the filing number, the date, the name of the clerk listed as witness. Then she closed the ledger, thanked the young man politely, and walked out. Sam was at the wagon. He read her face before she said a word. What did you find? The filing was inserted, she said quietly. The handwriting doesn't match the surrounding entries. Someone left space and filled it in afterward. She kept her voice low. The witness name on the filing is a clerk named D. Harwell. Do you know that name? Sam's eyes narrowed. Dale Harwell. He's been at the land office 3 years. He's the one who processed 2 of the buyout ranchers' paperwork. A pause, hard and deliberate. That's not a coincidence. No, she said. It's not. She looked at him. We need to tell Aldred. Today, before we leave town. They were back in Aldred's office within the hour. The lawyer listened to what Megan had seen, asked 3 precise questions, wrote down the filing number she'd memorized, and then sat back in his chair with the expression of a man assembling a picture that was becoming clearer and considerably uglier. If Harwell has been facilitating false filings, he said, then Vickers' entire acquisition pattern may be tainted. All of it. Not just your case, Mr. Reed. He looked at Megan with the same recalibrating attention he'd given her earlier. You have an excellent memory, Miss Foster. I kept accounts for 3 years, she said. Numbers don't leave my head easily. Fortunate for us. He tapped his pen against the desk. I need a few days to prepare the approach carefully. In the meantime, say nothing to anyone. Both of you. Understood, Sam said. They were almost out the door when Aldred said, Miss Foster. They both turned. You've been a considerable help to this situation. Are you staying in Copper Springs? She felt Sam beside her go very still. I haven't fully decided, she said. Well, Aldred said, returning to his papers. I hope you do. On the ride back, they were quiet for a while, not the uncomfortable silence of two people who had nothing to say, but the kind that comes after something significant has happened, and both people need a moment to settle around it. Sam broke it first. You didn't have to do that, he said. The land office. You didn't owe me that. I know I didn't. She kept her eyes on the road ahead. Why did you... She thought about how to answer that honestly. Because it was wrong, she said. What Vickers is doing is wrong, and when something is wrong and you have the means to do something about it, you should do something about it. She paused. And because this ranch is worth fighting for. You built it. It's yours. He was quiet for a beat. And if it hadn't been worth fighting for, she looked at him then. Then I would have told you to take the money and start somewhere new. I don't fight lost causes. A pause. But this isn't one. He held her gaze for a moment, just a moment, the way he'd been doing more often now, like he was checking something and finding it still true. Then he looked back at the road. Aldred asked if you were staying, he said. Yes, she said. He did. And you said you hadn't decided. That's what I said. Another silence. The wagon moved through the dry afternoon, the heat pressing down and the dust rising behind them in a soft, red wake. Is that true? He asked. That you haven't decided? She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. I don't have a home to go back to, she said, which was true. The house in Dayton was sold after my father passed. There's nothing there with my name on it anymore. That's not what I asked, he said. She looked at him. He was watching the road, his jaw set, his good hand steady on the reins. He was asking something specific, and they both knew it. He was asking it the only way a man like Sam Reed asked things, indirectly, with the question wrapped inside another question, giving her room to not answer it if she didn't want to. She took a breath. I like it here, she said. I didn't expect to, but I do. His hand on the reins shifted slightly. The ranch needs more work than I can do alone, he said. The south fence is only half done. The garden you cleared needs planting. The east line needs proper fixtures before the dry season sets in harder. He said it looking straight ahead. I'd need somebody who knew the work. That sounds like a job offer, she said. It sounds like a fact about the ranch, he said. What you do with it is up to you. She looked at his profile, the set jaw, the straight line of his shoulders, the slight tension around his eyes. That was the only thing that gave him away. She thought of the kitchen table and gray bread, and his hand covering hers for one brief, honest moment. She thought of sitting in the chair beside his bed all night, and watching the dawn come in, and not once wishing she was anywhere else. I'll stay through the planting, she said, and through the legal fight. After that we'll see. He nodded once. Fair enough. But something in his face eased something she caught before it settled back into its normal steadiness. And she turned away and looked at the road so he wouldn't see that she'd seen it. They were a mile from the ranch when they found Clem Dawes's wagon pulled off the road, and Clem himself standing beside it, with his hat in his hands, and a look on his face that made Megan's stomach drop before he'd said a single word. Sam, Clem said. Something happened. Sam pulled the wagon up. What? The east fence. The new section, the part Miss Foster restrung last week. Clem's jaw worked. Cut. Somebody cut it last night. And your south gate, the big one at the road, padlocked from the outside. He looked between them. You've been gone all morning. Couldn't get word to you. Sam was down from the wagon before Clem finished the last sentence, moving with a speed that told Megan his body was considerably more recovered than he'd been admitting. The cattle? 3 head are in the east pasture. The fence being cut didn't push them out, the grass held them. But if they'd wandered, who saw it? Nobody saw anything. Nobody admits to it. Clem turned his hat over. But Sam Dale Harwell came by here this morning, around 7. I was checking your water line and I saw him ride past slow. He didn't stop. But he was here. The name hit the air between Sam and Megan like a struck match. Sam turned to her. His eyes were dark and very still. Dale Harwell. The clerk, she said. The one whose name is on the filing. He knows we were in town today, Sam said. He knows we were at Aldred's office. Somebody told him. Or he assumed, Megan said. You don't respond to Vickers' letter for 2 weeks and then the day you go into town and visit a lawyer. She stopped. He's watching, or someone is watching for him. Sam's jaw was tight. He's telling us to back down. Yes, she said. He is. They looked at each other. The afternoon pressed in around them hot, and still the desert stretching out in every direction. The fence cut the gate padlocked the clerk riding past at 7 in the morning. Each action was small enough to be denied. Each one alone was nothing. Together they were a message delivered clearly and without a signature. Sam reached back into the wagon for the cedar box with the survey documents. He held it for a moment, and she could see him deciding something, could see the weight of it moving through him, the calculation of cost against what was worth fighting for. We're not backing down, he said. No, she said. We're not. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. I know that. He looked at her. And you're still staying. She met his gaze. I told you. Through the legal fight. A pause, steady and deliberate. I don't leave when things get hard, Sam. It landed where she meant it to, the quiet reference to Clara Whitfield, to everyone who had turned away when the weight of a situation became real. She saw him receive it, saw the precise moment it reached him. His expression shifted through something complicated and arrived somewhere quieter. All right, he said. He turned to Clem. Help me get that gate open. Then I want to look at the east fence. Clem moved. Megan moved too. Climbing down from the wagon, and Sam looked at her as she came around the side. You don't have to. I restrung that fence, she said. I want to see where they cut it. He didn't argue. They walked together toward the east fence. Clem ahead of them, the sun throwing their shadows long behind them across the dry ground. And for a moment, just one Sam's hand brushed hers as they walked. Not accidental, not announced. Just a touch brief and deliberate, gone before she could do anything with it. She kept walking. Her heart was doing something entirely unprofessional inside her chest. The fence had been cut cleanly in 2 places, not torn or broken, but cut with something sharp and deliberate, the wire laid neatly aside, as if the person doing it had taken their time. Sam crouched beside the cut section and examined it without speaking, his face doing the controlled blank thing that meant he was furious. This morning, he said. Yes, Clem said. The wire wasn't cut when I rode past at 6. Between 6 and 7. Sam stood. Right before Harwell rode by. He turned and looked at his land, the pasture, the cattle still grazing calmly in the distance, the mountains beyond. The ranch he had built from $100 and an idea in the years before grief had hollowed him out, in the years that grief had made him rebuild himself quietly and alone. Megan watched his face. She watched him look at what was his and feel the particular fury of a man who has made something and is watching someone try to take it piece by piece in small enough increments that each one can be explained away. Fix the wire, he said. I'll hold it. She picked up the end of the cut wire. He took the other end in his good hand, and they worked together in the late afternoon heat, pulling the fence back tight, while Clem worked the splice, and nobody spoke, but the work was steady and real, and when the last post was secured, Sam tested it with his full weight, and it held. He put his hand flat against the fence post. It holds, he said. It holds, she agreed. He turned to look at her. His face was closer than she expected, the afternoon light on it, the dust and effort of the last hour written plainly on him. He was looking at her the way he'd been looking at her, more and more like she was something he was deciding about slowly and carefully, with the same deliberateness he brought to everything that mattered. She held his gaze. She didn't look away. "Thank you," he said, quietly, with none of the deflecting awkwardness he usually wore around gratitude. "You're welcome," she said. The same way she'd said it that first night in the doorway of his bedroom, with the lamp behind her. But it meant something different now, and they both knew it. Clem cleared his throat behind them with the tact of a man who knew when he'd become a third wheel without quite intending to. "I'll check the water line," he said, and moved off with considerable purpose. Neither of them watched him go. Sam's hand came up, careful, deliberate, no pretense of accident about it, and tucked a loose strand of her hair back from her face where the wind had pushed it. His fingers barely grazed her jaw. He pulled his hand back before she could react to it, and looked at her with the expression of a man who had just done something he'd been not doing for a while. "Sorry," he said. "I shouldn't—" "Don't apologize," she said, and the words came out before she'd decided on them, which told her something important about herself. He looked at her. She looked at him. The desert afternoon pressed in around them, hot and still and entirely indifferent, and Megan Foster felt the last carefully maintained wall between what she'd permitted herself to want and what she actually wanted develop a long, irreparable crack. "Megan," he said. "We should check the south gate," she said, and started walking because she needed 30 seconds and some distance to remember how to be steady. She heard him behind her, not following immediately, just standing there for a moment. Then his boots on the ground catching up. He didn't say anything else, but when she reached the south gate and bent to look at the padlock, he stood beside her, close, not crowding, just there, and the particular feeling of him standing beside her was something she was going to have to think about very carefully later, when she was alone and could afford to. The padlock was a good one, new. Whoever had put it there hadn't done it in a hurry. "I'll need bolt cutters," Sam said. "I saw some in the barn," she said. "I know where they are." He looked at the lock. "Vickers wants me to feel like I'm already locked out of my own land." "Does he know you?" A beat. "No," he said. "Then he made a mistake," she said. Sam Reed looked at the padlock on his gate, and the mountains beyond it, and the ranch he had built with his own hands. And beside him stood the woman who had shown up 11 days ago, with $11 and a battered trunk and a limp. She'd spent her whole life making other people not notice, and he thought that Aldous Vickers had made several significant miscalculations. The most significant one was thinking that Sam Reed faced this alone. "I'll get the bolt cutters," he said. "I'll check on Bess," she said. "Come up on her right side." "I know," she said. "I learned." And they separated, moving across the yard toward their respective tasks in the easy way of two people who have quietly and without announcement learned how to share a space, and neither of them spoke about what had just happened at the fence post. But neither of them forgot it either. Thomas Aldred sent word 3 days later. The message came with Clem Dawes, who arrived at the ranch just after breakfast with a folded note and the look of a man who had been told something interesting and was working hard not to show it. Sam read the note once, handed it to Megan without a word, and watched her face while she read it. The letter from Patrick Greer had arrived in Aldred's office. The retired surveyor, 71 years old and living in Tucson on a pension, had written back within a week. He remembered the Reed property survey. He remembered it specifically because the eastern boundary had required extra care. The creek bed had shifted since an earlier mapping, and he had documented the correction in his field notes, which he still had. He was prepared to sign an affidavit. He was prepared, if necessary, to travel to Copper Springs and testify in person. Megan looked up from the letter. "He still has his field notes." 40 years of surveys, Sam said. "He kept every one. Vickers has nothing to put against that." She set the letter down on the kitchen table. A signed affidavit from the man who ran the original lines with contemporaneous field notes against a filing that was inserted after the fact by a clerk who can be shown to have a pattern. She stopped. This is over. It's not over until it's over, Sam said, but she could hear something different in his voice. Something that had been wound tight for weeks was beginning slowly and carefully to ease. Aldred wants us in his office this afternoon, she said. He's contacted Lucille Haas. She's coming in. Then let's go, Sam said. Lucille Haas was a small woman, 60 or so, with white hair and a straight back, and the particular expression of someone who had been frightened for a long time and had gotten tired of it. She sat in Aldred's office with her hands in her lap and listened to everything Megan had found in the land office records, and when Megan finished, Lucille looked at her and said, "I knew the filing was wrong. I knew it the day I saw it. But when I said so, they told me I was confused." "You weren't confused," Megan said. "No," Lucille said. "I wasn't." Something came back into her face, not anger exactly, but the thing that comes before anger, when you've been told for so long that your perception is wrong and someone finally confirms that it wasn't. "What do we do?" Aldred laid it out. Greer's affidavit, the filing irregularities, the joint challenge, the letter to the Territorial Land Commission which had the authority to open an investigation into the land office itself, into Dale Harwell, and any other clerk who had facilitated false filings on Vickers's behalf. "If the commission investigates," Aldred said, "every property Vickers has acquired through this method comes under scrutiny. Not just yours, Mr. Reed, not just yours, Mrs. Haas, all of it." "That's what we want," Sam said. "That's what will happen," Aldred said. "Provided you're both prepared for Vickers to push back hard before this resolves. He has money. He will use it." "Let him," Lucille said quietly and absolutely. They drafted the joint challenge that afternoon, Aldred writing Sam and Lucille signing Megan reading each section before it was finalized, catching 2 places where the language could be tightened, and 1 place where a date was miscopied. Aldred noted each correction without comment, but when they were done, he looked at Megan over his reading glasses with the expression he'd been wearing since the first day they'd come to his office. "Have you ever considered the law?" he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "As a profession. You read documents the way lawyers read documents. You retain information precisely, you identify the operative detail, you understand which fact matters most in a chain of facts." He stacked the papers neatly. "There are women practicing law in the territories. It's not common, but it's not impossible either." Megan was very still for a moment. She had never once in 27 years had anyone suggest that what she did with her mind had professional value. Not the merchant in Dayton, not her father, not anyone. "Thank you," she said. "That's a considerable thing to say." "It's an accurate thing to say," Aldred said. "I deal in accurate things." Sam beside her said nothing, but she felt him looking at her. They filed the challenge the next morning. Aldred delivered it personally to the land office, which meant Dale Harwell received it across his own desk, and Clem Dawes, who happened to be inside the general store across the street at the relevant moment, reported afterward that Harwell had gone a particular shade of pale that Clem found very satisfying to describe. 2 days after that, Aldous Vickers came to the ranch. Megan was in the garden when she heard the horse. She looked up and saw a man she didn't recognize riding up the road at a pace that was not quite fast enough to be called aggressive, but not slow enough to be casual. He was well dressed for the frontier coat proper hat boots that hadn't seen a day of actual ranch work. He had the look of a man who was accustomed to arriving places and having people rearrange themselves accordingly. He stopped at the fence and looked at her. "Is Sam Reed here?" "He is," she said. She stayed where she was in the garden with the weeding tool in her hand. "May I ask who's calling?" "Aldous Vickers." He said the name the way people say names they expect to land with weight. She let it land without visible effect. "I'll get him," she said. "Please wait at the gate." She found Sam in the barn, and she kept her voice low and even when she told him. She watched him process it, the brief stillness, the jaw setting, and then he set down what he was working on and straightened to his full height. "He came here himself," Sam said. "Yes." "That means he's worried." "Yes," she said. "It does." He looked at her. "Come with me." She hesitated. It wasn't her land, wasn't her fight in the legal sense, and he said, "You found what you found in that land office. You have a right to be there when I tell him what we know." She nodded. They walked out together. Vickers was still at the gate. He hadn't dismounted, which Sam noted with a look, but didn't address. He stopped at the fence and faced the man across it. "Mr. Vickers," he said. "Mr. Reed." Vickers looked at Megan briefly, clearly trying to determine who she was and deciding she was probably no one important. It was a mistake Megan had watched men make her entire life. She kept her face neutral. "I'd like to have a conversation," Vickers said. "Privately." "Anything you have to say to me, you can say here," Sam said. "What do you want?" Vickers shifted in the saddle. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about the boundary claim. I'd like to resolve it directly, without involving lawyers or commissions. These things get complicated, drawn out, expensive for everyone." "They do," Sam said. "Especially when the filing turns out to have been inserted by a land office clerk who's been doing it for 2 years across multiple properties." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "Did you know about that, Mr. Vickers? When you filed the claim against my land, did you know that Dale Harwell was inserting the documentation after the fact?" Vickers' expression did a careful, controlled thing. "I don't know what you're referring to." "I think you do," Sam said. "And I think the Territorial Land Commission will find it very interesting to determine exactly when you knew it and how much you paid him for it." A silence. Vickers looked at Sam, then at Megan, and this time he looked at her with something different. The recalibration of a man who has realized the person he dismissed was not in fact irrelevant. "The commission," Vickers said carefully, "doesn't need to be involved in what is essentially a property dispute between neighbors. It became a commission matter the moment someone committed fraud against a public filing system," Megan said. She kept her voice pleasant and exact. "That's not a boundary dispute. That's a criminal matter. The distinction is important." Vickers stared at her. "And who are you exactly?" "Megan Foster," she said. "I'm the one who read your filing in the land office and identified the handwriting irregularity that proves it was inserted after the surrounding entries." She held his gaze without blinking. "I have a very good memory for details." The silence that followed was of a different quality than the ones before it. Vickers looked at Sam. Sam looked back at him with the patient, immovable expression of a man who has decided and is done deciding. "My original offer stands," Vickers said, but the confidence in it had thinned. "Your offer was a quarter of the value of land you knew was mine," Sam said. "That offer was never going to be accepted. And now that the commission has been notified, it doesn't matter anyway. Withdraw the filing, Mr. Vickers. Withdraw all the filings. Because if the commission starts looking at Lucille Haas's property, and mine, they will look at every acquisition you've made in this county, and I promise you, you do not want that." Vickers held himself very still. Then he said with the clipped precision of a man swallowing something bitter, "I'll speak with my legal counsel." "You do that," Sam said. "Good day, Mr. Vickers." Vickers turned his horse and rode away at the same, not quite aggressive pace he'd arrived with, and Sam and Megan stood at the gate and watched until he was gone from sight. Then Sam let out a long, slow breath. "You think he'll withdraw?" Megan asked. "I think he'll test whether we're serious first," Sam said. "And then he'll withdraw." He looked at her. "That thing you said about the handwriting irregularity about the commission, you said it like you'd been saying it for years." "I said it like it was true," she said, "which it is." He shook his head slowly with something in his face that was past admiration and not yet named. "Megan Foster," he said. "Sam Reed," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then looked away, and she could see him working up to something. The particular stillness of a man who has been assembling words for a while and is finally ready to say them. Then Clem Dawes's wagon appeared at the end of the road, and whatever Sam had been about to say went back wherever it had been waiting. Clem had news. Dale Harwell had not shown up at the land office that morning. His landlady reported that he had left his room before dawn with 2 bags. His desk at the land office had been cleaned out. "He ran," Sam said. "He ran," Clem confirmed. "Which means he knew the commission letter was coming before it arrived. Which means Vickers warned him. Which means Vickers is more directly involved than he's pretending," Megan said. She looked at Sam. "Harwell running is actually better for your case, not worse. A man who cleans out his desk before an investigation arrives is a man who knows he's guilty. Aldred needs to know today." "I'll ride in," Sam said. "We'll ride in," she said. Sam looked at her. Then he looked at Clem. "You heard nothing I'm about to say." Clem blinked. "I'm practically deaf," he said amiably and climbed back in his wagon. Sam turned back to Megan. "After this is done," he said. "After Aldred files the supplement and the commission has what it needs, and Vickers has withdrawn after all of that." He stopped. "Yes," she said. "I want to ask you something. And I want to ask it when there isn't a legal crisis happening and Clem Dawes isn't 15 feet away." He held her gaze. "Can you give me that?" She looked at him. At this man who had thrown a water basin at the doctor and eaten every bite of his sister's gray bread, and called out her name in a fever, and held the fence wire with one good hand while she worked the splice, and who had built something real out of hard ground and refused to let anyone take it from him. "Yes," she said. "I can give you that." Aldred took the news about Harwell with the satisfaction of a man whose legal theory had just been confirmed by the defendant's own behavior. He amended the filing to the commission within the hour, noting Harwell's flight as evidence of consciousness of guilt, a phrase Megan privately found perfect in its precision. They were back at the ranch by late afternoon. The summer day was long, and the light was still gold when they returned, the kind of evening that made the desert look like something it was always meant to be. Megan fed the chickens, checked the cattle, confirmed that Bess the mule was exactly as she'd left her, suspicious and unrepentant, and then stood at the fence of the south paddock and let herself feel the full weight of the last 3 weeks. She had arrived in Copper Springs with $11 and a battered trunk, and the specific grief of someone who has had hope taken from them in public. She had survived it. She had done more than survive it. She had found work and done it well. She had cared for a sick man back to health. She had walked into a land office and read a document and found the thread that might unravel 2 years of fraud. She had stayed when it got hard, and the staying had turned into something she couldn't have named on that train platform, something that fit around her now, like a place she had always been moving toward without knowing it. She heard Sam's boots behind her. He came to stand beside her at the fence, close the way he had been standing beside her since the day at the east fence post. She didn't turn. "Harwell's gone," he said. "That's one piece. The commission will do the rest." "Yes," she said. "Aldred thinks Vickers will withdraw inside 2 weeks. Once it's clear the commission is looking at all his acquisitions, holding on costs him more than letting go." "Yes," she said. "The ranch is going to be all right." "Yes," she said for the 3rd time. He was quiet for a moment. "You knew that before I did," he said. "You knew it the night we read that letter in the kitchen. You looked at me across that table and said we would figure it out, and you meant it like it was already done." She turned to look at him then. He was looking at her with the expression she had been watching build for 3 weeks, the last held-back thing in him right at the surface, barely contained, waiting to be said. "I had a good reason to want it to work out," she said quietly. "Just the job," he said, not accusatory. Just asking straight and clear, the way Sam Reed asked things when he was done going around them. "No," she said. "Not just the job." He reached out and took her hand. Not the brief, careful contact of the night at the kitchen table. This was deliberate and full and warm, his rough hand around hers, and he held it like he intended to. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not through the planting. Not through the legal fight. I want you to stay." He met her eyes. "I know what I'm asking. I know you came out here for something that didn't work out, and I know you're not the kind of woman who settles for the nearest option just because it's available. So I'm not asking you to settle." His voice was steady and direct and stripped of everything except what it was. "I'm asking you to stay because this place is better with you in it. Because I am better with you in it. And because I think you might feel something close to the same way." Megan held his gaze. Her chest was full of something that had no clean name. Not just the feeling itself, but the surprise of it. The strange and genuine surprise that after everything, after Ohio and Dayton and the train and the platform and Ethan Parker's turned back, she had ended up here in this particular place with this particular man, and it felt like not luck. Luck was too light a word. It felt like something harder and more deliberate than luck. "I do," she said. "Feel something close to the same way." He squeezed her hand. "That's all I needed." "Sam," she said. Ask me properly." He looked at her, a quick look startled, and then something that broke open in his face. He turned to face her fully, her hand still in his, and he said without any of the careful indirection, "Megan Foster, will you stay? Will you build this with me? Not as a caretaker, not as a hired hand, not as anything temporary, will you stay?" She looked at him, this man who had rebuilt himself from grief and solitude and loss and was still somehow standing. This man who had said, "I wasn't there, and I tried in the dark of a fever," and had never once asked for her pity over it. This man who had looked at her leg and then looked at her face, and what she'd found in his face was not calculation, was never calculation, but something honest and unhurried and entirely worth the 1,000 miles she'd traveled to find it. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." He brought her hand up and held it for a moment against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat steadier than she expected, steadier than hers, and then he said very quietly, "Good." "Good," she agreed. They stood at the south fence in the late gold light of a summer evening, and the ranch spread out around them. The garden she had cleared, the fence she had mended, the east water line she had repaired on her hands and knees in the dirt. The barn where Bess the mule held her permanent grudge. All of it work she had done. All of it ground she had covered. All of it now something she had a stake in that had nothing to do with $5 a week. 3 weeks later, Thomas Aldred sent word that Aldous Vickers had formally withdrawn all 3 disputed boundary claims, his Lucille Haas's, and the third still pending case Aldred had tracked down on the county records. Dale Harwell was found in Prescott and returned to Copper Springs to face an inquiry by the Territorial Land Commission. The inquiry, Aldred noted in his letter, would likely expand. Other names would surface. The commission was thorough. Lucille Haas sent a note of her own delivered by her neighbor's boy that said simply, "I am still here. My land is still mine. Thank you both." Megan read it at the kitchen table, and Sam read it over her shoulder, and she felt him behind her, warm and solid and present, and she folded the note carefully and set it beside the cedar box that held the survey documents. The cedar box that would stay now, like everything else worth keeping. The south fence was finished by the end of that week. The garden was planted, tomatoes, beans, corn, and a row of the wildflowers that Megan had found growing at the edge of the property and moved carefully root by root because they were beautiful and they had survived there without anyone tending them, and she felt a particular kinship with things like that. Sam had watched her do it without comment, but she'd caught him twice looking at the row of transplanted flowers with an expression that she recognized now as the one he wore when something had moved him and he hadn't found the words for it yet. She didn't need the words. She had learned to read him the way you learn a language, not by studying rules, but by living inside it until the meaning comes naturally. On the last evening of August, they sat on the porch after supper, the 2 rocking chairs Sam had pulled out from where they'd been stored in the back of the barn, because the porch had always had the chairs, he said, but he'd stopped using them after Margaret. Megan had said nothing when he brought them out. She'd just set hers in place and sat down. "Patrick Greer wrote again," Sam said. He had the letter in his hand. He says if we're ever in Tucson, he'd like to meet. He says he's glad the survey held. It was good work, she said. He should be proud of it. He is. Sam folded the letter. He said something else. What? He said the best surveys are the ones that give a person a true picture of what they own, so they know what they're standing on. Sam looked at the letter for a moment. He meant it about land, but I've been thinking about it differently. Megan looked at him. How? He turned to face her. In the evening air with the stars coming up and the desert settling into its nighttime quiet, his face was the most open she had ever seen it all. The careful guardedness that grief had taught him. Laid aside, replaced by something steady and certain and entirely his own. I know what I'm standing on, he said. I know exactly what I have, and I know its worth. She held his gaze for a long, still moment. Her chest was full and warm and sure. So do I, she said, and that was the whole truth of it. Two people who had both been left standing alone on one kind of platform or another, who had found in each other not a rescue, but something better. A partner, a witness, a reason to keep building. Megan Foster had come to Copper Springs with $11 and a battered trunk, and a hope that had been broken on a train platform, and she had found in the end something that no letter of correspondence and no arranged introduction could have given her, something she had built with her own hands on ground. She had earned beside a man who saw her clearly and chose her completely. She was home.